When you see the same odd thing in very different kinds of schools, you take notice. A few years ago, I saw the exact same poster on classroom doors in a public school in Minnesota, a Catholic school in Indiana, and a quasi-progressive Friends school in Massachusetts. The poster on the classroom door said, "Only positive attitudes allowed beyond this point." I was stunned, thinking about how the children who walked into that classroom every day would read this. It basically was saying to them, have a nice day or else. You know, I fantasized breaking into the school at night and replacing the posters with one that said, "My mental health is so precarious, all of you had better pretend you're happy." Maybe I'm being nitpicky to criticize something like posters, but I think what's taped to walls or doors is revealing about the educational priorities of the adults who put them there, their attitudes about kids, even their assumptions about human nature. So today, I want to look at bad signs in schools. I'm Alfie Kohn, and this is Kohn Zone. I have to confess I'm allergic to people with an aggressively sunny outlook, regardless of whether circumstances call for it. You're reflected in all of these self-help materials you can get, and books with the same words just flipped around in different combinations, like inspiring your positive self to heal by practicing mindful gratitude, or is it grateful inspiration for self-healing through mindfulness positivity practice, or whatever. I was, frankly, a little relieved in the early stages of the pandemic in 2020 that people were starting to have second thoughts about this, and there was talk about toxic positivity. You don't have to be curmudgeonly in order to react about this. I mean, first of all, that positivity suggests that it's all about individual reactions. The attitude you have had better be positive, and it can be positive. This fits into a long tradition of growth mindset and grit and other things that say the problem isn't with the system you're in, it's about how you're reacting to the system. So smile. There was a study in 2024 by researchers at Santa Clara University that said even when you hold political beliefs constant, people who are really keen to avoid negative feelings at all costs, the kind of people who say, "Ooh, what do you want to talk about that for? It's so negative. It's so depressing." Those people are less likely than others to acknowledge systemic racism. Interesting study. I'll bet other studies would find that they're also less likely to acknowledge other systemic problems because it's all about the individual. Now, it's even worse when you see a sign like "only positive attitudes permitted past this point." It's worse when you think about the impact on kids, because when I see especially little kids around adults who have these huge brittle smiles and voices that swoop into unnaturally high registers, there's often a lot of dark stuff lurking just behind that. It's not just the treacliness of the way they're acting. It's the compulsive tendency to praise kids when they've done something helpful. Good job. The implication here is, the very pessimistic implication here is that if kids did something nice, it must have been a fluke. And you got to marinate them in squeaky praise and thumbs up whenever they happen to do something nice. Otherwise, they're certainly not going to do it again. So the more compulsive the reaction, the more squeaky the voice, the bleaker the underlying view of kids. or maybe of our species, And beyond that, it's putting kids on notice that their attitudes had better damn well be positive. That tells us less about what's optimal for kids' learning than it tells us about the needs of the person who's sending this message. Or maybe I should say the neediness of the person sending this message. Kids don't need a classroom that's relentlessly upbeat. I mean, they need a place where it's safe to express whatever they're feeling, even if that happens to be angry or sad or scared. They need a place where negativity is allowed. Bad feelings don't disappear. They don't vanish in an environment of mandatory cheer. They just get swept under the rug, where, to continue the metaphor, people can trip over them. Plus, a negative attitude may be an appropriate response to an unfair rule or an intimidating climate or a task that seems pointless or impossible. To exclude those responses by telling them they have to have a positive attitude means we're refusing to think seriously about whatever gave rise to their negativity. That leads to another sign that I've seen around in high schools and elsewhere. Maybe you've seen it too. It says, "No whining." Or more commonly, it says the word whining in a big bold letter, and then there's a red diagonal slash through it. So what's the message here? The message is, I don't want to hear your complaints about anything that you're being made to do or that you're being prevented from doing. Maybe this is what your boss would like to say to you, but it doesn't mean it's admirable to take this attitude, to insist with a kind of smirk, really, that students should just do whatever they're told, regardless of whether it's reasonable. If your boss said this to you, you'd probably be frustrated or resentful to get such a message. So why would you treat kids that way? What no whining, I think, is really communicating is that the person saying this has more power than the person to whom it's being said. All right, maybe sometimes the person is just being literal in thinking about whining as a kind of wheedling tone of voice. I don't want to do. But even if that's the case, should that reaction on our part take precedence over the content of what the kid is saying? Yeah, that whining annoys me too when I would hear it from my kids when they were young, but I'm less annoyed by that sound than I am by a disproportionately severe reaction to it on the part of adults. If your kid is talking in a wheedling tone of voice, you can remind them periodically, matter-of-factly, that people tend to be put off by certain ways of asking for things, but the priority is to make sure the kids know we're listening, that our relationship, isn't contingent on the way they're talking to us. Besides, it occurred to me a while ago that young children in particular need to have some way of expressing their frustration. Right? They're not allowed to hit. They're not allowed to scream. They're not allowed to curse. Now we're telling them they can't even use a tone of voice that's, insistent. But regardless of what kind of whining people are keeping in mind when they say no whining, if you go to the trouble to post a sign like that, you're really saying that our convenience, meaning the unquestioning compliance with our wishes of the people we're talking to, the kids, our convenience matters most. And you're also saying that you're not willing to reconsider your actions. You're not interested in having students question authority, even though I would argue, and in fact have argued elsewhere at length, that education at its best consists of helping them to do exactly that, to question authority rather than mindlessly complying with whatever they're told to do by people who have more power than they do. So put no whining on the list after only positive attitudes permitted here. But now I want to talk not only about specific legends of posters, particular sayings. I want to talk about a whole class of posters that are inspirational. You know what I'm talking about? You find them outside of a school's main office or in the cafeteria or the library or individual classroom walls. These earnest, interchangeable calls to greatness. Typically, they're superimposed on gorgeous, fading photographs. They say things like, "You can if you think you can. Reach for the stars. Achievement is within your grasp. Winners make the effort. This year I choose success," and on and on and on. Okay, here I have to confess again, I'm not a big fan of posters that you buy going up on school walls. I don't think they're just a harmless way of covering up those god-awful painted cement blocks. They're impersonal, generic items that aren't created by or even for the particular people who go to school here. And in fact, I tend to think that any school where they would adorn the walls with posters created by distant corporations might well be having distant corporations create their curriculum as well. But these posters, these inspirational things, I think are uniquely off-putting. And you see them, by the way, not only in schools, but in workplaces. Have you seen the parodies of these, which are hilarious? Look up online demotivators. Like there's one that this company sells that has a dramatic image of the pyramids, and it says, "Achievement. You can do anything you set your mind to when you have vision, determination, and an endless supply of expendable labor." They have another one that has a packet of fast food French fries, and it says, "Potential. Not everyone gets to be an astronaut when they grow up." Oh, one more, which I love. It shows a leaping salmon that's about to wind up in a bear's jaws. And it says, "Ambition. The journey of 1,000 miles sometimes ends very, very badly." But let's not just satirize. Let's analyze here. These exhortatory slogans on motivational posters and speeches and in books has this emphasis on strenuous uplift and an emphasis on self-sufficiency. The message is, as individuals, you and I can do anything if we just set our minds to it. Okay, first problem. Really? You can achieve anything by hard work? And you know, it's not a coincidence, I think, that you find these kind of posters and this kind of inspirational uplift primarily in neighborhoods where it's hardest to defend, especially low-income kids who are constrained in all kinds of ways. And then we want to tell them about the wondrous results that await anyone with perseverance and a dream. Come on. With certain goals, the news is even worse. Like, think about some of the things we tell kids. You work hard enough, you can be the valedictorian. Okay, that's not just unrealistic. It's a zero-sum game. Only one person can be the valedictorian. If I'm it, you can't be. In competitive cultures and schools, our dreams are mutually exclusive. Somehow that doesn't wind up on the poster. You can get into Harvard. Okay? And what happens when I, like 96% of the other super qualified, self-selected applicants get my rejection letter from Cambridge? You know, I mean, what if I chose success and I reached for the stars and I stayed true to my goals and I wound up with nothing? Some people, you know, are understandably going to get angry, concluding, not unreasonably, that they've been lied to. I worry more about the other kids who will blame themselves, which is kind of the whole point of inspirational posters and slogans. The late Barbara Ehrenreich, in her book Bright-Sided, How the Relentless Promotion of Positive Thinking Has Undermined America, puts it very well. She said, "The flip side of positivity is a harsh insistence on personal responsibility. If you fail, it must be because you didn't try hard enough, didn't believe firmly enough in the inevitability of your success." And who benefits when the have-nots are led to think that way? Nothing maintains the current arrangement of power more effectively than an approach that ignores the current arrangement of power. We're not inviting people to consider the existence of structural barriers, of really pronounced disparities in resources and opportunities. We're being fed the line that there are no limits to what each of us can accomplish on our own if we just buckle down. Maybe these posters are generic about what you can achieve, but a lot of times the implication is that success, achievement per se, are desirable. It doesn't matter what you want to achieve or succeed at. Any dream will do. And again, I'm skeptical. Whose interests are served when you look at things that way? Okay, my dream is to get an A in math class. So here, the implication is that's a fine dream. You can do it if you try hard enough, with enough grit and determination and perseverance. Do we want kids to think that success is about high grades? The research shows that when you get kids thinking about grades, when you give grades and push them into their faces, three things tend to happen. Kids become less interested in whatever they're learning. They tend to avoid really challenging tasks because that'll get in the way of their getting an A. And they tend to think in a more superficial, shallow fashion. That's why the best classrooms and schools do not use grades, something you may have heard me talk about elsewhere. So that is not a particularly constructive practice and therefore dream. The poster seems to imply that getting a high grade is no less meaningful than coming up with, a novel solution to a meaningful intellectual challenge. Are all dreams equally valuable? Is making $1 million as worthy as working for a more just society? If you don't make these distinctions and encourage critical thought about these issues, then the dominant goals and values in our society are accepted by default. Hard work is always good? Who gets to decide on the nature and purpose of that work? It's just the questions you don't ask if you're told your attitude determines your future. The message, this is not new, the message of the self-help movement for more than 100 years has always been adjust yourself to the conditions you find yourself in, because those conditions are immutable. All you can do is decide on the spirit in which to approach them. Hint, we recommend a can-do spirit. To do well is to fit in. To fit in is to perpetuate the structures into which you're being fit. So maybe I'm, again, being too hard on posters, expecting too much from them. Well, they're so pervasive and they're accepted so uncritically, I think it's worth digging into the hidden premises of their chirpy banalities. Just because something isn't regarded as controversial doesn't mean it's value neutral. Imagine, for example, a very different kind of poster up in a school. Imagine you walk into a high school and you see posters up in the cafeteria or near the library that say, "Some children are born into poverty, others are born with trust funds." It's interesting to think about what the illustration for that slogan would be. Or what if there was a slogan that quoted George Carlin? "It's called the American Dream because you have to be asleep to believe in it." Just to mention a poster like that to a lot of people would lead them to say, well, it's kind of controversial. But where's the outrage over the subliminal values of the real posters, the ones that airily tell us the sky's the limit? The proof of the ideological use of these inspirational slogans is that, again, they are employed with particular intensity in the schools of Black and brown children in the inner city. The self-empowerment agenda is not just background decor. Jonathan Kozol was very attentive to that, having spent a lot of time in classrooms in places like East St. Louis and Harlem. And he talked about the political implications of making Black students chant, "Yes, I can, I know I can," or "If it is to be, it's up to me." These, he said, are very popular with conservative white people because, quoting Kozol here, if it's up to them, the message seems to be, it isn't up to us, which appears to sweep the deck of many pressing and potentially disruptive and expensive obligations we may otherwise believe our nation needs to contemplate. And he added, auto-hypnotic slogans like, "I'm smart, I know that I'm smart," are rarely heard in suburban schools where, quote, "the potential of most children is assumed." I would love to see, just speaking personally, some research that counted the number of motivational posters and other self-help, positive thinking materials and activities in a school, and then looked at other stuff in the school. My hypothesis is that the popularity of inspirational slogans would correlate very highly with a lower probability that kids are ever allowed to participate in meaningful decision-making about their learning, that there would be less emphasis on critical thinking threaded through the curriculum, less welcoming attitude toward questioning authority. I would also predict, I have no data on this, but I would predict that schools with these posters are much more likely to be run by the kind of administrators who brag about the school's success by using conventional indicators and are less inclined to call those criteria into question or challenge troubling mandates like higher authorities telling them they have to have the zero-tolerance discipline policy or pressuring them to raise scores. All right, I shouldn't wrap this up without talking about what good signs might be. I'm not sure we need any signs. I'm not sure we need commercial posters at all. But if we were going to replace these mass-produced exhortations to stop whining or remain upbeat or pretend to be upbeat or remember to triumph over adversity, yeah, I've seen some stuff on school walls that I like a lot better. First, you could just have a sign up that says, "Question authority." Or a similar one I saw in a Washington state classroom. It said, "Think for yourself. The teacher might be wrong." Or, here's one, maybe for the principal's office, from Linda McNeil, who had been until her death a professor at Rice University in Houston. "Measurable outcomes may be the least significant results of learning." If I saw that in a principal's office, I would immediately know a lot about that school. It might be the kind of place I'd want to send my kids. What's another sign? For fans of irony, have you seen this one? "The beatings will continue until morale improves." I'll take that. I saw on a middle school, on the lockers, each kid on the locker had a sign that said, it had his or her name, "is currently reading," and then a photocopy of a cover of a book. Isn't that so much better than those insipid read posters in libraries to personalize it? In fact, all sorts of information about the kids, the people who are in the school, personal mementos going up on the walls of the classroom says, "This is a school about us. I'm wanted here." Debbie Meyer's school in Boston, the Mission Hill School, also had childhood photos of all the teachers in the school up on the walls. And why aren't the walls filled with stuff done by the kids? That would make more sense than these posters. And the answer to my rhetorical question, now that I think about it, is because the kids may not have been allowed to do anything worth displaying. If they're filling out worksheets, who the hell cares about that? So, that brings me back to my original hypothesis. The decor may speak volumes about the the theory and the practice of the kind of instruction in that school. The best classrooms feature signs and exhibits and other materials that are obviously created by the kids themselves. They're ideas for how to create a sense of community and learn together most effectively, not a list of rules imposed on them by the teacher or commercial posters. So I guess the bigger question, the meta question, if you like here, is not just what should go on the walls, but who decides what goes on the walls? The kind of signs and posters that I've been criticizing here were probably put up by the adults without ever consulting the kids. I mean, what child would suggest no whining? Maybe the exclusion of the people being taught is the most significant implication of what goes on the wall, though it's usually invisible. So to reverse that, we would need to rethink not only what we're posting, but whether schools invite kids to participate in thinking about what they do and the look of the place where they do it.